At 6:10 a.m. on January 6, 2026, an atmospheric river exploded over Beijing with the force of 40 hurricanes. Within minutes, 7 centuries of Chinese imperial history vanished beneath 36 feet of black water. The Summer Palace, where emperors once walked on sacred ground, became a drowning tomb. But this isn't just about ancient stones and forgotten gardens. By the time you finish watching this, you'll understand why this disaster reveals a terrifying new reality that could strike any city anywhere without warning. The initial surge hit Beijing's northwestern districts like a liquid avalanche. Emergency sirens screamed across 18 districts as the city's drainage systems, designed to handle 4 inches of rain per day, faced 28 inches in 6 hours. The Kunming Lake, normally a tranquil centerpiece of the Summer Palace, transformed into a raging inland sea that swallowed pavilions whole. But here's what the first reports couldn't capture. This wasn't just flooding. This was an atmospheric river event, a phenomenon that meteorologists describe as rivers in the sky, delivering moisture equivalent to 15 Mississippi rivers directly over one of the world's most populated cities. The storm system had been brewing for days over the Pacific, invisible to most weather models until it was too late. By 7 a.m., Beijing Capital International Airport disappeared under 6 feet of water. Runways became lakes. Terminal buildings stood like islands in an endless gray ocean. Over 520,000 passengers found themselves stranded, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as their flights to safety vanished beneath the surface. The speed was unprecedented. Subway stations that had operated flawlessly for decades flooded in 12 minutes. The Beijing Metro, 459 stations across 27 lines, became a network of underwater tunnels. Commuters trapped in morning rush hour faced a choice: abandon the trains or drown with them. Power grids cascaded into failure across the metropolitan area. By 8:15 a.m., 10.6 million residents plunged into darkness. Cell towers toppled. Communication networks died. Beijing, a city that never sleeps, went silent in the space of a heartbeat. But the atmospheric river was just beginning to unleash its full fury. Here's what makes atmospheric rivers so deadly. They're essentially conveyor belts of water vapor that stretch across thousands of miles of ocean. Imagine a river flowing through the sky. Except this river carries more water than the Amazon and moves at jet stream speeds. The Beijing event formed when Pacific moisture collided with an Arctic cold front that had stalled over northern China. The temperature differential created a pressure vacuum that acted like a massive atmospheric funnel, concentrating oceanic moisture into a narrow corridor barely 200 miles wide. When this corridor reached Beijing's mountainous terrain, it had nowhere to go but down. The rainfall rate peaked at 50 millimeters per hour, faster than Beijing's storm drains could physically process. But atmospheric rivers don't just dump water, they create what scientists call vapor transport. The system was simultaneously pulling moisture from the Pacific while compressing it over Beijing, creating a feedback loop of intensifying precipitation. The topography made everything worse. Beijing sits in a natural basin surrounded by mountains that act like walls, trapping water with no escape route. The Yangding and Chaobai rivers, normally manageable waterways, became torrents, carrying debris from upstream deforestation. Ancient riverbeds, paved over by decades of urban development, couldn't remember their original purpose. What terrifies meteorologists isn't just the volume of water, it's the precision. Atmospheric rivers can deliver catastrophic flooding to areas just 50 miles wide while leaving neighboring regions completely dry. Beijing was in the crosshairs of a weather weapon that most residents had never heard of. Stay with me, because understanding this mechanism reveals why traditional flood defenses become useless against atmospheric rivers, and why what happened next caught even experts completely off guard. Zhang Wei lived 3 blocks from the Summer Palace. He'd walked past the ancient gardens every morning for 32 years, never imagining he'd watch 3 centuries of imperial history disappear in real time. "I saw the Kunming Lake overflow," he posted desperately on social media before his phone died, swallowing pavilions like they were toys. Li Mei ran a small shop near the Forbidden City. As water crashed through her storefront, she faced an impossible choice: save her life's work or save her life. "The water came so fast, I couldn't save my shop or my leg," she would later tell rescue workers. "But I'm alive." Her shattered ankle would heal. Her business, 40 years of careful building, would not. Wang Jin found himself holding his 7-year-old daughter above black water for 18 hours. His apartment building in Haidian district had become an island surrounded by a toxic lake. "I thought we'd drown together," he whispered to rescuers who finally reached them by boat. His daughter Xiaolin kept asking about her dog. "Mommy says he's in heaven," she sobbed. "But I want him back." The elderly faced the cruelest choices. Grandma Zhao, 93 years old, lived through Japanese occupation and the Cultural Revolution. "I've survived wars," she said from her hospital bed, "but nothing like this. My home of 60 years is just mud now." Emily Carter, a tourist from California, was photographing the Temple of Heaven when the surge hit. "One minute I was taking pictures," she said in a viral video. "The next I was swimming for my life. The city is gone." Her camera captured the last images of landmarks that would never look the same. These weren't just statistics. These were people who woke up in one of the world's greatest cities and went to sleep as climate refugees in their own homeland. Dr. Zhang Hui from Peking University had been studying atmospheric rivers for 15 years. 3 days before the disaster, his computer models showed something unprecedented: moisture transport rates exceeding anything in Beijing's meteorological record. "We warned of heavy rain," he told reporters afterward, "but no model predicted 700 millimeters. This was a wake-up call." But the warnings fell on deaf ears. Beijing's emergency management system was designed for traditional flooding, gradual river overflow, manageable drainage problems. No one had protocols for atmospheric rivers because no one believed they could strike northern China with such devastating precision. Chen Liang, a People's Liberation Army rescue officer, witnessed the human cost firsthand. "We're pulling people from rubble every hour," he radioed to command, "but there are too many. We need more boats." His voice cracked as he described families trapped on rooftops, watching their neighbors disappear beneath the surface. The international scientific community reacted with alarm. "Atmospheric rivers are becoming more frequent due to climate change," warned Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the National Center for Atmospheric Research. Beijing wasn't ready for this, but neither is any major city. Her research showed that warming oceans create more moisture for atmospheric rivers to transport, while changing jet stream patterns make these events more likely to stall overpopulated areas. UNESCO's Maria Lopez surveyed the damage to World Heritage sites with growing horror. "The loss of the Summer Palace is a tragedy for humanity," she said, her voice barely steady. "We must protect what remains." But protection requires preparation, and preparation requires accepting that the impossible has become inevitable. The disaster followed a terrifying pattern that emergency planners had never anticipated. First came the initial flood at 6:10 a.m., devastating but localized. Then came the secondary surge at 2:30 p.m. as upstream dams, never designed for such volume, began structural failures. The Miyun Reservoir, Beijing's primary water source, reached critical capacity by noon. Dam operators faced an impossible choice: release water gradually and flood the city slowly, or risk catastrophic dam failure that would flood the city instantly. They chose controlled release, not knowing that downstream infrastructure had already collapsed. Each failure triggered the next in a cascade of urban breakdown. Flooded electrical substations cut power to pumping stations. Without pumps, subway tunnels became death traps. Without subway evacuation routes, surface roads became impassable. Without transportation, emergency services couldn't reach victims. The economic losses mounted exponentially. Every hour of flooding added billions to the final tally. Guotao, who owned an electronics manufacturing plant, watched $2 million in equipment disappear beneath toxic water. "How do I start over?" he asked, staring at his submerged factory. His question echoed across thousands of businesses. By day 3, secondary disasters emerged. Contaminated water supplies threatened disease outbreaks. Damaged chemical plants leaked toxins into floodwater. Overwhelmed hospitals struggled with injuries, infections, and trauma cases simultaneously. The pattern revealed a chilling truth. Modern cities aren't just vulnerable to atmospheric rivers. They're designed to amplify the damage. Every system depends on every other system, creating failure cascades that transform manageable disasters into civilizational collapses. Stay with me, because this pattern isn't unique to Beijing, and the historical precedent proves that what happened there could happen anywhere. Beijing had flooded before, but nothing prepared residents for this scale of destruction. In 2012, the city faced its worst flooding in decades when 4 inches of rain in one day killed 79 people. and caused widespread damage. Authorities promised better drainage, improved warnings, enhanced preparedness. Those improvements proved meaningless against an atmospheric river. The 2012 flood moved slowly, giving people time to evacuate. The 2026 disaster struck with the speed of a tsunami and the duration of a siege. Traditional flood defenses, designed for gradual river overflow, became death traps when hit by oceanic volumes of water moving at highway speeds. The parallel that haunts experts is the 1939 Tianjin flood, when river diversions caused catastrophic urban flooding. But that disaster affected a city of 2 million people with 19th-century infrastructure. Beijing in 2026 housed 21 million people with infrastructure that seemed advanced but proved catastrophically inadequate. History's lesson is clear. Cities that ignore low-probability, high-impact disasters don't just suffer when those disasters strike, they collapse completely. 3 days after the initial surge, Beijing resembled a post-apocalyptic lake. Satellite imagery showed 80% of the metropolitan area still underwater. The Forbidden City stood like a medieval castle surrounded by a toxic moat. High-rise buildings became islands where survivors waited for rescue boats that might never come. The death toll climbed hourly as rescue teams reached previously inaccessible areas. The official count of 5,580 dead and 62,300 injured understated the horror because tens of thousands remained missing, presumably trapped in submerged buildings or swept away by currents. Are you starting to understand why this disaster terrifies urban planners worldwide? Beijing wasn't just a city that flooded, it was a preview of what atmospheric rivers can do to any major metropolitan area. Infrastructure damage reached unprecedented levels. Over 39,400 buildings suffered severe damage, with 9,500 collapsing entirely. The Beijing metro system, once a model of modern urban transportation, became the world's largest underwater tunnel network. Repair costs alone exceeded the GDP of most countries. But the most chilling aspect wasn't the physical destruction. It was how quickly a world-class city reverted to medieval conditions. No power, no communication, no transportation, no clean water. Modern civilization, it turned out, was far more fragile than anyone had imagined. Recovery planners faced a sobering reality. Rebuilding Beijing would take a decade and cost more than most nations' annual budgets. The $369 billion in total economic losses exceeded the Marshall Plan in today's dollars. But money couldn't restore what was truly lost, the irreplaceable cultural heritage sites that defined Chinese civilization. The Summer Palace, a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1998, lost 80% of its ancient structures. Pavilions that survived wars, revolutions, and centuries of natural disasters disappeared in 6 hours of atmospheric river fury. "We're not just rebuilding buildings," said Reconstruction Coordinator Liu Wei. "We're trying to rebuild history itself." International implications rippled outward. China's economic growth, already slowing, faced massive disruption as one of its most productive cities became uninhabitable. Global supply chains dependent on Beijing's manufacturing and technology sectors scrambled to find alternatives. The disaster's economic impact reached every continent within weeks. But the scariest scenario involves what scientists call compound events, multiple atmospheric rivers striking different cities simultaneously. Climate models suggest that warming oceans and changing jet streams make such events increasingly likely. Beijing was just the beginning. Cities worldwide began emergency assessments of their atmospheric river vulnerability. New York, London, Tokyo, every major metropolitan area suddenly faced the question that Beijing couldn't answer. What happens when the impossible becomes inevitable? The reconstruction efforts would reveal whether human resilience could match nature's new fury. But first, survivors had to make it through the immediate aftermath of the worst urban disaster in modern history. 6 months after the Beijing catastrophe, atmospheric river activity across the Pacific remains unprecedented. Meteorologists track multiple systems with growing alarm, each carrying the potential to repeat Beijing's devastation anywhere Pacific moisture can reach. The underlying conditions that created the January 6th disaster, warming oceans, disrupted jet streams, urban vulnerability, have only intensified. Climate scientists describe a terrifying feedback loop. Each atmospheric river event releases enormous amounts of water vapor into the atmosphere, potentially fueling the next system. The Beijing disaster may have been less an isolated catastrophe than the opening shot of a new era of megafloods. Dr. Zhang Hui's latest research reveals that atmospheric rivers are not only becoming more frequent, but also more precise. We're seeing targeting that defies probability, he warns. These systems are finding the most vulnerable cities with frightening accuracy. His computer models show dozens of major metropolitan areas in the crosshairs of potential future events. Beijing's reconstruction proceeds slowly, haunted by a question no engineer wants to answer. How do you rebuild a city to withstand forces that exceed every historical precedent? Traditional flood defenses proved useless. Modern drainage systems became death traps. The very infrastructure that made Beijing a world-class city became the mechanism of its destruction. The human cost continues mounting. Survivors describe lasting trauma, economic devastation, and a profound loss of faith in the safety of urban life. We thought we were protected by progress, reflects survivor Wang Jun. We learned that progress made us more vulnerable, not less. Beijing's nightmare revealed that atmospheric rivers can target any city, anywhere, anytime. The conditions that created January 6's disaster are spreading globally, and no major metropolitan area has adequate defenses. The question isn't whether your city could survive an atmospheric river. It's whether you're prepared for the moment when the impossible becomes inevitable. Subscribe now, because this story is far from over.